Hello and welcome to the Wildcast podcast. This is Michael Lev, senior writer and columnist for the Arizona Daily Star. Very special guest today, my friend and colleague, Brian Pedersen of AZ Desert Swarm. Hi, Brian. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me finally.
Finally, we are talking Arizona baseball here. We could talk about U of A basketball. We could talk about Severance. We could talk about Silo, any of our other favorite TV shows on Apple TV Plus. We could talk about politics, but no, we are going to talk about Arizona baseball today. This is going to be your primer for the upcoming U of A baseball season. It begins on Friday in the Shriners Children's College Showdown in Arlington, Texas. It is truly a full circle moment for Chip Hale. That's where he began his U of A coaching career. There are, I believe, 3 players who are still on the team from that first squad: Garen Caulfield, Tommy Splain, and Eric Orloff, a few true seniors. We also found out what the initial weekend rotation is going to be. Maybe that's a good jumping off point for us, Brian. You saw what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Some new faces, some young blood in that mix. We've got Colin McKinney, the transfer from Baylor. I think that was expected that he'd be the number 1 guy. But then you've got Owen Kramkowski, the true sophomore from Walden Grove High School, and you've got Smith Bailey, who was one of the 2 big time recruits that they were able to get from within the state of Arizona. What were your initial thoughts when you saw that rotation?
Other than McKinney, I was very surprised. I thought that at least one of the other 2 transfers that they had picked up from the portal, either Christian Coppola from Rutgers or Hilger, who'd been at Wisconsin Whitewater, would be a candidate for that. I was also wondering if we might have seen Casey Hintz in that initial rotation, since after 2 years of being back-end reliever, 7th, 8th inning guy, he was stretched out to 5 innings in one of the more recent scrimmages with the intent of having him as a possible starter. So I think it just speaks to 2 things: that there are a lot of options, but that they just really don't know who they think is the best, and they're using the preseason as a testing ground for the areas that they really don't know about yet.
Yeah, these things are definitely written in pencil. We tend to kind of overreact to whatever the initial weekend rotation looks like. Kind of like when the first depth chart comes out in football, like everybody freaks out. But these things change over the course of the year. I always go back to 2016, which was the first year that I covered U of A baseball. Bobby Dahlbeck was the closer at the start of the season, and he ended up being like their number 1 or number 2 starting pitcher. And Cameron Ming was someone that they looked at as a starter, and he ended up becoming a back of the bullpen type of guy. Casey Hintz is an interesting one. I think he could have a variety of roles this season. He's just so different from everybody else. He throws from the side. He throws a sinker. It's kind of his primary pitch. He gets a lot of ground balls. He doesn't throw, if he throws over 90, it's probably a surprise. He's in that low 90, upper 80s range as a right-hander. But it's a look that you don't see very often. Colin McKinney, on the other hand, is kind of what you envision as a number 1 starter, right? He's about 6'5", throws in the mid 90s. He was one of the guys that they brought in through the transfer portal. Smith Bailey also fits that mold, even though he's a lot younger and skinnier at this point. But again, like 6'5", 6'6", mid 90s. And then Owen Kramkowski, who's a local kid, as I mentioned, from Walden Grove. Might throw the hardest of anyone on the team. He's also like only 168 pounds still. Sounds nice, doesn't it, Brian?
Yes. And I'm excited to see what he can do, because when I used to live down in Sahuarita, where Owen is from and where his father used to run the Copper Hills Little League, he may still. And my stepson was in the same league at the same age group as Owen. And to see him now, after being a 6-year-old scrawny little baseball player back then, and now a guy that could be in the rotation, is really fun. He's a huge wild card, because He hardly pitched his senior year of high school because of an injury. And then last year he got into, I think, 4 games in usually midweek blowout type.
I think it was 3 games and
Yeah.
1 1/3 innings or something.
Yeah, and
like
one
that.
of those
Yeah.
was that ridiculous blowout loss to Grand Canyon, where I think the final score was 28-7 that Arizona lost. So you really didn't get to see what he could do, but from what we saw during the fall, and apparently that continued here in the spring, he's really benefited from Kevin Vance and John DeRuin and all the things that they are able to do with finding the best stuff. And I've seen a mention of Slim Reaper for a nickname for him, but the name I'm going with is based on a tweet from the fall of him just having this very effortless strikeout, and they refer to it as easy cheese. That's what I'm going with for him, easy cheese, because he looks like one of those bottles of the spray cheese. Like, he's very tall and thin, and I'm just, the effort and the flow of his throw just seemed very seamless. So I'm going with easy cheese for Owen Krakowski.
We love to come up with nicknames for the baseball players, and we'll get into some more of those as we move on here. But the thing with those elbow issues is it takes time, to come back from that. I don't know. Do you know if he had surgery or if it was just, they had to shut him down? I don't know if we know that, but either way, it was like a pseudo redshirt year last year.
Mm-hmm.
If the rules were different in baseball, if they had something like football, it would have been a redshirt year where you maybe play a small percentage of the games. They should have something like that for baseball, especially. I know you've advocated for that, Brian, like the midweek exception or something to that effect. So essentially a redshirt freshman, technically a sophomore. I had thought that maybe Owen Kramkowski was someone they'd look at as a closer, just come in and, throw that upper 90s fastball by people. But maybe it's a little actually less pressure to be a starter than to be in that 9th inning guy. In some ways, just, hey, just go do your thing. There's plenty of, there's no panic. We've got a good offense, got good fielders behind you. I saw him in the scrimmage the other day. He pitched 4 innings and looked pretty good. So I'm intrigued to see what he can do. And then, of course, Smith Bailey and Mason Russell, they kind of go together. Mason is not part of that initial weekend rotation, but those are 2 guys, the type of guys that they have not gotten to campus previously under Chip Hale. I think expectations are sky high for what those 2 guys are capable of.
Oh, certainly. I mean, Mason Russell was a top 100 prospect, and for all intents and purposes should have been drafted much higher, but he made it known to the scouts and to the teams that he had a very high price and he wanted to go to college. And if someone was willing to match that very high price, then he would look at going pro. But instead, I think he went and got drafted right at the end, just as just in case, let's see if maybe we can talk him into it. But there's been other guys that back from the last few years of the Pac-12 that did that. A player who from the Phoenix area, just like Russell, who did that at Oregon State, Gavin Turley. He put in a big number saying, hey, no, I want to develop in college and use this opportunity. And now he's probably going to be a first-round pick because of what he's done in his 2 years and with this 3rd year at Oregon State. And I think that's what Russell and to an extent Smith Bailey can do, is that they can develop in college and figure things out. And yes, it's a little more difficult on the pitching side because they could get knocked around. But I think that can also show them where they can get better. And it may be why there's this weird dynamic that you and I have both brought up maybe over the past 8 to 10 years at Arizona, that the hitters who thrive in college don't seem to do as well once they become pros. If they've come from Arizona, whereas the pitchers who get knocked around find themselves on a much faster track. I mean, Chase Silseth is a great example. He was the #1 pitcher for Arizona in 2021, but he had an ERA over 5. And what do you know? He ends up in the major leagues less than a year later. And then you see all these other guys in the minor leagues, but all these big name hitters, it hasn't worked. Maybe it's because the pitchers have learned from getting knocked around. So I think that Russell and Bailey can definitely benefit from the fact that they're going to get hit.
Yeah, couple points about this. Number one, we don't talk about the elevation here in Tucson the way that we do like Denver,
Hmm.
right? But this is, High Corbett's sort of a poor man's Coors Field in that sense. And there's a reason that the outfield dimensions are the way that they are,
Hmm.
because the ball tends to carry here more so than it does places that don't have the elevation. What's the elevation of Tucson? Like
About
2,300 feet or something like
2,300,
that?
something
Yeah.
like that. But when you combine that with the dry air, yes, it
Yep.
becomes an easy place to hit and a difficult place to pitch in. And especially as the season goes on, the infield becomes so dry that basically any ball on the ground is probably going to get through. So you have to take all those kind of numbers with a grain of salt with on the pitching side, and to an extent, you have to take those into consideration when evaluating the hitters as well. But yes, it's a very, very hitter-friendly place, and probably much more hitter-friendly than 80% of the leagues or the stadiums that they'll play in as a pro. So if they can pitch with semi-effectiveness or pitch towards that condition here, it stands to bode well in the pros.
Yeah, hitter friendly despite the fact that it's 410 to left center and 405 to right center. I mean,
Sure,
the
it's not.
most
They're not.
ridiculously
Yeah,
deep power alleys you will
yeah.
ever see
You're
anywhere.
not giving up a ton of home runs, but you're giving up so many doubles and triples on balls that you would think otherwise would have gotten to, because the outfitters have to play so deep or so far to one side. You see that especially in left field, especially like those first few series of the year when you see visiting teams come in, those left fielders, you feel so bad for them because they put up all this effort and, well, nope, that's a double, that's a triple, when they all they're trying to do is keep it from going like past them, but there's so much in front of them.
Yeah, and there's also, I would say, like one ball per series that they lose in the sky, and maybe the second or third inning of these games that
Mm-hmm.
start around 6 o'clock, like right around the time that the sun is setting,
Yeah.
that kind of dusk and the lights haven't kicked in. But the other thing I was going to say is last year, the pitchers did not get knocked around, and that is because they brought in Kevin Vance and John DeRuin to kind of overhaul the overall approach to pitching.
Mm-hmm.
Very data driven. Those guys are the ultimate analytics gurus that you will ever find, and it was a dramatic transformation. I mean, Arizona had the best um, walk per nine rate in all of college baseball. I mean, which is, if you follow Arizona baseball at all over the last 5 to 10 years, like we have, that is absolutely remarkable and stunning development that they were able to do that. What's been your impression of kind of what Kevin and John have brought to the table here?
Well, I wasn't at the game that I'm about to reference, but you were. Just imagine thinking that Arizona would lead the country in that stat a few years after being part of. Wasn't there a game with like 30 or 40 walks at one point? Wasn't it like a Grand Canyon game a few years ago where
Well,
it
there
was?
was the ASU game was the one where Jay Johnson just completely lost his mind. They blew multiple leads. I don't know how many walks there were in that game, but a lot.
Yeah,
Errors. I think the final score was 17-16. But there
yeah.
were a lot of those types of games that they would be involved in. And I would never at any point say like, oh man, this staff is renowned for its control, But I don't know. The new guys, they don't tolerate that. They have instilled a mindset of, it's like 0-2 or 1-2 or death.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and death is really not an option, or otherwise you're just not going to pitch.
Yeah.
So it's been very impressive what they've been able to do.
Yeah, and it's so above my pay grade and understanding of all of the data that is used in it. When Vance and DeRuin first showed up and were making references to things like trunk space and I understand arm slot,
Trunk
trunk
stack.
stack. Yes, see, it's
Yes.
just all these different things about the way that the body is positioned and the shape of the ball coming out of the hand and all of this. And it just seems so complicated that I was actually worried that they were going to overdo it and make this into like a video game and not properly factor in that these are human beings and human body. But they've managed to meld that based on last year's results and what they've seen so far this offseason. And I think that's what drew McKinney and Coppola and some of these other pitchers, is that they see, hey, these guys are not just expecting me to throw, they want me to pitch, and they show a way to do it. And I think a really good indication of how important and how big this has been is that Chip Hale, who's been a major league manager, who's been a minor league manager and all that, he's basically like, this is you guys. I don't want, I'm not staying away from the pitching, but I'm letting you guys decide how we pitch, who we pitch, when we pitch, the order and all that. Chip goes out and makes the change, but it's Vance that's deciding who's pitching, in what order, when to pull, all of that, calls the pitches. And for Hale to just kind of completely defer to those guys and trust them is a pretty good indication of how effective he expects this to be.
Yeah, Chip, I think he goes out there because someone has to be the bad cop,
Mm-hmm.
right? And he's kind of willing to play that role, to be the one who actually goes out to the mound and changes pitchers. But yeah, those guys, they've really taken ownership of all things pitching. With Arizona, they have, they were ones who pushed for and helped to get built the pitching lab that Arizona now has, which is called the Arizona Baseball Pitching Wing. It is named after former Arizona pitching coach Jim Wing. I wrote a story about the pitching lab on our website and in our paper. You can check that out at Tucson.com, part of a whole baseball season preview spectacular that we put out there. I also did a story about the junior class, and we'll get into those guys a little bit more. But the interesting thing about the pitching wing is they've got this mound called the Newt Force mound, and they measure ground force. And this is sort of helps them determine like where's the power coming from that you're generating? Like, is it your back leg? Is it your front leg? And they can make these minor adjustments to the way these guys deliver the ball, and the overall goal to try to simplify it, Brian. And that is the goal of the coaches too, to simplify it for the players. It's how can we get these guys to move in the most efficient way, right? And that means to get the most power with the least effort. And that's what they're trying to do when they look at whatever data they're looking at, whether it's Kinetrax, whether it's TrackMan, whether it's the data from the Newt Force mound. It's efficiency. And look, I'm totally knocking wood here, okay? But Kevin Vance said to me that he's yet to have a guy undergo Tommy John surgery under his watch. He acknowledged that, his luck could run out, that could change, but that's a big part of what they're doing and like what Wake Forest's pitching lab is all about. It's not just maximizing performance, it's also geared toward keeping these guys healthy. And as we know, that is super important when you're going through a baseball season and you're trying to win, the College World Series.
And I think a guy like McKinney is one that can definitely benefit from that. He has said he doesn't really know or understand the whole analytic side, but he knows that that's what these guys do, and that they've sold it really well. And he wants to be a better pitcher. And he's dealt with injury himself. He missed 2023 because of injury. And then his one full season at Baylor, he walked 35 guys in 49 innings. He struck out 60. So he definitely has stuff, but there's things probably about his whole approach throwing that needs to be tweaked to better fit his size. What is he listed at? You said 6'4", and he's got some size on him, and there's a lot of power there, but he needs to hone it in. And that mound that you referenced allows them to see all of the things that you can't see just by watching. You can see different weight balance and all that, and just try to tweak it. And I'm very happy to see that, because you see all these arm injuries that are happening in baseball now, and I've heard people try to blame it on the pitch clock and all of this, and I don't think we're giving enough credence to the fact that everyone is trying to throw maximum effort every single time, and that's going to lead to that strain. And if you want to still have the maximum effort, you need to make sure that you use having the minimum amount of strain on the body. So this whole approach, while also making them more effective pitcher, is also probably giving them that better muscle memory, so that it's not overdoing a muscle or a ligament that is not designed to be that way. I mean, if just the simple fact that our bodies are not designed to throw a baseball the way the standard way. So you need to make sure that everything is shifted so that you aren't overdoing it and causing something to rip.
Yeah, one of the other things Kevin Vance mentioned in regard to the Newt Force mound is that it helps you to differentiate, from kind of one pitcher to another. The idea that everyone's different, like every single person's different. Like he said, like at a certain point in his career, like he tried to make everyone throw like Max Scherzer because Max Scherzer was the best pitcher in baseball at that time, and he came to realize that like not everybody can be like Max Scherzer. Like he gave the example of Owen Kramkowski as someone who generates most of his force from his front leg as opposed to his back leg. So once they figure that out, they don't try to, you need to push off your back leg more or whatever. Like that's how he throws. That's how he generates his power. And everybody's a little different. Casey Hintz gave me the example of, they were able to determine like this slight difference, right, in the length of his stride was like a 1 or 2 mile per hour difference in velocity and also affected how much his sinker would sink. So when he shortened up his stride ever so slightly, it made his pitches more effective. And they could determine those exact calculations by using this special mound that they have in their pitching lab. All right, one more thing I want to talk about regarding pitching before we switch over to the offensive side, Brian, is how they're going to handle the pitchers. Chip has made references in the past to piggybacking. Can you explain what that is and what you think this might look like, especially early in the season?
Yeah, the piggybacking is essentially where you already know who your second pitcher is going to be before the first one starts throwing, and that there's kind of a predefined end date, maybe with some wiggle room of how many pitches or how many innings the first guy's going to go, with the second one also knowing in advance how long that'll be. And that really plays a lot early in the season when you're still trying to stretch guys out. And I think that'll definitely be the case for the third game when Smith Bailey pitches, because they were hoping he would be at 5 or 6 right now, but they think that he's more at the 3 or 4. So if you know that, but you're also starting the guy, that means you already know that you're going to be using someone else second. And I think that they, even just from the relievers, they always have a plan of who they probably are going to use each game, depending on maybe the inning and the batters that are coming up. But if you already know that you're going to have a block or a chunk pitcher coming in after this first one, it allows that first guy to not feel like they have to conserve energy and they can maybe go a little more. And with the amount of pitching depth they have, particularly on the starting side, you could very easily find yourself in situations where nobody faces a batter twice. You could go 9 batters, 9 batters, 9 batters, and completely keep hitters off their toes. That may mean a guy is going the full 3 innings if he's perfect, or it could mean he's only going 2 innings, or maybe not even 2 innings, but is avoiding that. It's a matter of how many pitchers you want to use in a game over a series. When Arizona gets into Big 12 play, they're going to be able to have 30 players on the road and at home as opposed to 27 in the Pac-12. And that stands to be that they're probably going to have 2 extra pitchers during that time. They're going to have 3 extra pitchers this weekend for the Shriners tournament. And when you know that, and you don't bring guys on the road or put them on the conference game roster if you don't intend on using them, you maximize all that opportunity. And I think until they figure out who are going to be the defined starters, you're going to see that. Chip had just said that the guys starting this weekend might not start next weekend when Arizona hosts San Diego in their first home series. And that wouldn't surprise me. It doesn't mean those guys aren't going to pitch, but they probably just won't be the ones first on the mound.
Yeah, so in the Pac-12, once Pac-12 play would begin, you'd have 27 players that you could dress for a game, and you had to determine that before the series started. In the Big 12, it's 30. Chip said that they would take 16 pitchers and 14 position players for this first trip, but that typically it would probably be 15 and 15. And it's probably a good sign for the overall quality of the pitching staff that they have enough trust in that many pitchers. And maybe we'll see all of those guys. I would point out, too, that even though last year they definitely established a clear weekend rotation of Jackson Kent, Clark Candiotti, and Cam Walty, didn't start out with those 3. right? Tonko Susak was the third guy to begin with, and then he kind of faltered. Cam Walty took over and became the Sunday starter. He was really good in that role. Tonko eventually became a closer, and that helped him get drafted. So again, the roles can change over the course of the season. We'll see how how they plot that out as things progress here. But very intriguing to see what's going to happen on that side of the ball. Conversely, on offense, the lineup, most of these guys we know, we are familiar with. And I think the biggest reason that Arizona is a consensus top 25 team is the fact that they have a veteran lineup. They have older players. This is something that Chip Hale has talked about a lot. You asked him about it the other day. It seems like that's a big advantage in college baseball if you have that.
Yes. Yeah. If you have guys who are in their junior or senior year, third, fourth, in some cases, fifth or sixth year of college baseball,
seventh year, eighth year.
Garen Caulfield is older than some of his assistant coaches this year, which I realized after the fact.
You're not joking about that. That is accurate.
When you have that, all those at bats, all those plate appearances, all those games, and those are the guys that are playing every day. Whereas the pitchers, they may only pitch. The starters may only be out there once a week, and the relievers 2, 3, 4 times in a week. But if you're playing 5 games in a week, those guys are in the lineup every day. That consistency pays off. And this time last year, Arizona's lineup was very young. It's a lot of the same guys, but they were sophomores with a couple juniors. Now,
and some freshmen too.
Yeah. And
who are now sophomores. Yeah.
Yes. And it all pays off. And you look at the teams that go to Omaha, that win titles, they tend to be those guys that especially the junior class, the guys who are eligible to get drafted, who are notable names, and it pays off. And it kind of explains why, at least for a program like Arizona, they make since 2012, they have made the College World Series every 4th NCAA tournament. Not every 4th year because there wasn't a 2020 tournament. But they made the World Series in 2012, then 2016, now 2021. And if you go back to 2004, every 4th tournament they've at least made the Super Regionals. And that stands to fit with the kind of the rotation of in college baseball, because players, once they are in college, they are not draft eligible for 3 years unless they happen to be a draft eligible sophomore because they turn 21 within a certain time frame of the draft. But that's a minimal number of guys. So Arizona has this group of juniors who they have had to be in college for 3 years. They've been fortunate to keep them here together. But now this is the year where after this season, they decide, or it's decided for them, are you going to go pro or continue on? So it's kind of it's like the contract year is what it is for these players. And some guys struggle in that, but most of them really, really thrive. And if they can thrive together, then it really makes for a quality team.
Yeah, the headliners, of course, are Brendan Summerhill and Mason White. They are both juniors, and outstanding players, different players. To be sure, they've made a bunch of preseason, all conference and all American lists. Brendan Summerhill really broke out as a sophomore last year. He is a gifted all around player. I would say a 4-tool player, maybe the potential to be a 5-tool type of player. Hasn't totally realized his power yet. He's got kind of that long and thin frame, but someone I think if he puts it all together could have a 15-15 type of year, which, is kind of like being 30-30 or better in the majors. He's got that power speed combo, a little bit raw as a base runner. We bestowed the nickname on him of Summer Thrill because it's always an adventure
Never dull
when he's on the base paths. But he improved his base stealing efficiency in the Cape Cod League, where he impressed a lot of people with his overall skill. They're moving him to right field this year with Aaron Walton arriving from Samford and taking over in center. He's another draft eligible junior that they're very high on. But Summerhill is a guy that is probably going to lead off for this team and is really dynamic offensively with his keen batting eye, his ability to put the ball in play, use his speed, and also has that extra base power. And then Mason White is someone who's just sort of defied the odds throughout his young baseball career, overlooked as a recruit out of South Point High. I think the pandemic definitely hurt him as far as his recruiting went. Also, the fact that he's about 5'9" and he has a leg kick and he's got some swing and miss to his game. But man, Brian, when he connects, the power is unbelievable. Those two guys are kind of the headliners. They're going to be the foundational pieces around which this lineup is built.
Yeah, and we have others beyond that. You have, as I said, Garen Caulfield, 4th year with Arizona at second base. Tommy Splain, this is his 4th year. He's been in the postseason every year, and he's played in a lot of big games. He had the game-winning hit for them to win the Pac-12 tournament title. Third base, Maddox Mikalakis he emerged the second half of last year and had a huge summer, and it has kind of taken over that spot, though third base might be one of those positions that could have a couple different guys playing there depending on the pitcher that's going on there. We have Summerhill out there in the outfield. Aaron Walton, as you said, from Samford, is a very intriguing prospect. And then at catcher, you have Adonis Guzman, who showed a lot of great stuff this past year. And with one more year, he's a guy who could definitely get drafted from behind the plate. The young guy in the group probably is going to be Easton Brayfogle out in left field, who was playing a lot and then got injured, and it kind of threw off everything about what he was doing. But he has a very unique batting stance, and he's very quick out of the box as a lefty. And he's somebody that if they wanted to use Summerhill's power and bat control a little further into the lineup, I could see Brayfogle being somebody up at the top. I'm very excited to see what kind of lineup, how it's ordered with all the guys they have there, because they do have a good mix of lefty and righty. And the DH could be Andrew Kane. It could be TJ Adams. You have the mix and match where Splain can go to catcher, and then that would open up first base for someone like Andrew Kane. Chip had said there's probably 12 hitters who deserve at bats on a regular basis, and that's probably not going to stay that way the whole year. You can't really rotate as much, but early on, I wouldn't be surprised if you see 12 different players get starts in the field or in the batting order this weekend.
Yeah, the guys who are pushing the quote unquote starters, you mentioned one of them, TJ Adams. I think he's pretty clearly established as the number 4 outfielder, someone who flashed last year when they had some injuries in the outfield. He's also technically a member of that junior class, but he's a redshirt sophomore because he didn't play his first year at all. He got injured crashing into the wall, if I recall, last year, banged up his shoulder a little bit, but great speed, some power as well, and a right-handed batter. We have a lot of left-handed batters in the sort of main lineup mix. So he's one of them. Richie Morales is another one. Richie basically was the starting third baseman to start last season, and then I think he got a little banged up, and Maddox Mikalakis really came on and kind of took over. But Richie is someone who can play 3 infield positions. He gives you a good at bat. He'll probably walk about as many times as he strikes out. He'll put the ball in play. He can bunt. Chip Hale likes to have guys like that in his lineup. And then the other guy, maybe the most intriguing player on the team, is Matisse Miron. And he is a Frenchman who came over to the States to play for Cochise College for a couple years. Now he's at Arizona. He's a big switch hitting third baseman. He was a shortstop in junior college, and someone who, they were talking about him maybe being drafted this past year, straight out of JC. He had a labrum issue, a hip labrum, that kind of, curtailed him a bit in the fall, but I guess he's very close to 100%. He's really flashed during the preseason. I know that is someone we are eager to write about at some point, right, Brian?
Yes, I am very excited to test out my many, many years of French that I learned in middle school, high school, and in college. And just to be able to mostly to find out, how did you end up playing baseball in France, where apparently there aren't high school sports in France, and it's just, baseball is not the first sport you would think of from that country. And then how do you end up going from Paris to Douglas, Arizona, which, as we all know, is the Paris of Arizona, but just that kind of dynamic. And yeah, he probably would have been somebody that that a team would have taken a flyer on if he hadn't been injured, because he has great defensive skills. He has the kind of frame and body that you want to build around.
And he's a switch hitter.
Yeah, and as a switch hitter, there's so much you can do with that. I mean, those are the kind of players that they may not be stars in the pros, but they can carve out themselves a long career, getting a lot of one-year contracts that pay pretty darn well and get you to that 10-year vesting and live a nice, comfortable life. So it's a good problem that Arizona has, that they have this many people. Last year, the depth definitely got tested. It got to the point with the injuries in the outfield that Casey Hintz was playing center field in critical games the final weekend of the regular season against Oregon State. And Hintz is a very talented two-way player athletically, but he's focused so much on the pitching side in college that he just wasn't a bat that you could really put in there into the lineup. He was great defensively, but now to have those options and to be able to mix and match and to maybe give a day off, because like someone like a Mason White, he can have these great stretches, but he can also have some really bad games at the plate. And if he has that opportunity to maybe get a reset and sit a game, especially early on, or maybe a midweek type thing, it could really be great for his psyche overall, or for any of the guys. Chip has mentioned that because so many of these guys are draft eligible, you have, in addition to the team goals, there is that weighing mindset of like, what do the scouts think? Is this going to affect my financial future? And if you need to find a way to just kind of give a guy a breather so that he's not stressing over that. I don't think these guys are going to be too focused on that. We saw that with like when Daniel Susac was here, when Chase Davis was here, those guys went first round picks and the teams were struggling, but it's just like, hey, let's just keep doing our thing and not worry about what scouts are saying. So I'm not worried so much about that, but it is nice to know that they have that option and they don't have to be like, nope, you got to play through this.
Yeah, I think the lineup is deep enough where there isn't that undue pressure on those guys. Like, I think they could win even if Mason White was in a little slump or if Brendan Summerhill was in a little slump. The other thing they can do, talking about giving guys a day off, quote unquote, is you could DH Mason for a game on a weekend if you wanted to just get him off his feet. And you could play Richie Morales at shortstop as an example. I think they're going to do a lot of mixing and matching at the corner infield positions with Mikolakis, Morales, Morant, Andrew Kane, Tommy Splain. Like, I could envision, let's say, Guzman, Adonis Guzman plays the first two games of a series at catcher. Let's say they're, the Saturday game's a night game, and then they have a Sunday day game, which is often the case. Maybe Tommy plays the Friday game, then he takes off Saturday and he catches Sunday. And then Andrew Kane is the one who plays first base on Saturday. They've got a lot of options that they can look at. They can try to align the matchups in the most advantageous way, depending on if it's a traditional right-left type of thing, or maybe someone has reverse splits like Maddox Mikolakis last year seemed to actually do better against lefties. So,
I am always fascinated by the reverse.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I love seeing that kind of stuff, both pitchers and hitters. I think Arizona had a pitcher last year that was a righty that was great against left-handed pitching and not against right-handed pitching, which is not how it's supposed to be. But sometimes it works out that way.
Well, if you're Mariano Rivera and you've got that amazing singular pitch. That's
cutter.
Incredible. Yeah, the cutter that's incredibly effective against lefties. Then or you're Greg Maddux and you've got the two seam incredible two-seam fastball that looks like a ball until it breaks over the inside corner against lefties, and you can be effective. But hey, that's what they do in the pitching lab, right? They try to invent these amazing pitches. You mentioned Garrett Caulfield earlier. He's probably going to bat second between Brandon Summerhill and Mason White, and he's got gap-to-gap power. He's someone who can move runners over. Again, he'll give you a good at-bat. There's nothing he hasn't seen in college baseball. And I think that Aaron Walton, the newcomer, is probably going to open the year as the cleanup hitter. He is someone, I don't know if you were there when Chip said this, Brian, but he said physically he resembles Mike Trout. That doesn't mean that he's nearly as good of a player as Mike Trout, but just the way he looks.
Yeah, let's hope that the physically doesn't go any beyond the appearance, and that it does not mean internally that the ligaments and all of those things are as fragile as they seem to be for Mike Trout. Let's not wish that on him.
Yeah, poor Mike Trout. He's just not been the same player in the back half of his career as he was the front half because of injuries. Kind of similar to Ken Griffey Jr. In a way. But that's another topic for another time. Let's talk a little bit as we finish up here, Brian, about just kind of the big picture of Arizona baseball under Chip Hale. First of all, though, what is your history in covering Chip? When did you first start to
back in my salad days working at the Arizona Daily Star from 1999 to 2010. In the middle there, I covered the now departed minor league team, the Tucson Sidewinders, and for a couple seasons, Chip Hale was the manager of that team, and so I got to talk with him on a daily basis and see how he ran a team, see how fiery he got. It's to the point where like when I see him walk out of the dugout at High Corbett, I can tell if he's mad or not by the way he walks, because I used to see it way back when, almost 20 years ago at the minor league level. So I was very excited when he got the job. In fact, as soon as it was confirmed that Jay Johnson was leaving, my first thought, and I put it out on the Twitterverse, was, what's Chip Hale up to at this point? Because I felt like he's somebody who would definitely love to be able to coach at his school. And I know there was a lot of concern about, what are you doing bringing in a guy in his mid-50s who's never coached at the college level? Is he really going to be able to fit in with it? And I think what Chip made sure to do was surround himself with guys who do understand how college works. And he said it just the other day that there's a lot he'd had to learn about college baseball, but the easy part is the 9 innings when he's just coaching a team and making all those decisions. That doesn't really matter what level you're at. The recruiting and the travel and meals and all of that took some time getting used to. But I think looking back on it, the results he's put up in his first 3 years, it's hard to really get too upset about it. The postseason results, they've ended up losing their last 5 NCAA tournament games, are disappointing, but you can't discount the fact that he's made the NCAA tournament in each of his first 3 years, which the only other coach in the modern era that has done that at Arizona was Frank Sansett in the 1950s. Jay Johnson didn't do it. Jerry Kindle didn't do it. Andy Lopez didn't do it. They all had a down year early on. I think people unfairly compare him to Jay Johnson because Jay made the World Series his first year. But his third and fourth years, he missed the tournament, and there were a lot of people that wanted him out. I think that Chip has really, really settled in, and they've definitely figured out the recruiting side of it. Trip Couch is the guy that is at the forefront of identifying the talent that they go after at the prep and JUCO level, and he's been an excellent piece of that. And then the decision to bring in Kevin Vance and John DeRuin and kind of reshape the pitching from a standpoint of both performance with this team, but also developing these guys for the pros, has definitely paid off for everybody involved.
Yeah, I think that Chip has disproved the notion that he couldn't be an effective college coach. The major concern that everyone had when he got here was, this guy hasn't coached in college before. He's never recruited before. Is he going to be able to recruit? He's a little bit on the older side. He just turned 60 years old. But as you said, he put a staff together that was, primarily from the college ranks, headed by Trip Couch, who's his recruiting coordinator. And every single time we see him, he is walking around with a phone to his ear, right? Like he's constantly working that recruiting problem. They've had this, they love this freshman class. It's probably the best class that they've had, headlined by, Smith Bailey and Mason Russell, those guys that we referenced earlier, those power arm pitchers that they haven't been able to get to campus. It's really difficult to get those guys to come to school. Chip is a smart guy. Like he has recognized the landscape of college sports, what's coming with revenue sharing, what already exists with NIL. Mm-hmm. And he and Trip have put in a lot of work behind the scenes to try to build that up. Right. I don't think they're going to come out and say like ASU did that we're going to fund all 34 scholarships, but their goal, and I think they're succeeding in this regard, is to basically create the equivalent of that. He's mentioned how he doesn't want the players to have to pay for school. And so they're building up toward that. I think people underestimated his ability to kind of see the big picture. Mm-hmm. They underestimated the fact that he's coming from professional baseball, and college sports are becoming increasingly professionalized. I think you asked him something along those lines when we met with him on November signing day, about just sort of being used to this world a little bit more so than maybe some of his colleagues, because he's been in that world in the pros.
Yeah. And his first coaching opportunities before he was with the Sidewinders was coaching instructional league and rookie ball. Those guys are the same age, if not younger, than what he's coaching right now. So there is a familiarity with players who have these lofty goals and have to start from the bottom. College is higher than a lot of those levels. I mean, it's effectively like a AA baseball, I would say. And you do almost all these guys have the goal of wanting to play in the pros. So whereas in minor league baseball, winning games and having a championship isn't really the goal. It's more about what you're doing with each individual person. But there's still that competitive nature. And when you're doing it for a school, it throws something in there. And let's not forget, he's a Wildcat. He's an alum. He was part of World Series teams, World Series championship. He's not going to half-ass anything about this. I mean, Chip Hale came to Tucson from Northern California in 1983, I want to say, and he's lived here his entire life since then, despite the fact that he was a pro baseball player and he has been a manager. His last job was with the Detroit Tigers, and he had an apartment in Detroit, but his family and his home is still here in Tucson. And so he's been part of this community, and he has seen what this program has meant, and he's, the last thing he wants to do is take that down a peg and make it look like, oh, I've done something negative to my school, because he was a Jerry Kendall guy, and he's put everything into that. And you see that passion with the way he is out there. I mean, that's maybe one of the biggest changes that has been for Chip from the first year to this one, is how he handles one game to the next, particularly after a loss. That first season, when you try to talk to him after a loss, you better have your guard up, because he's still smarting from the loss, and probably could have stood to have some cool off time. I mean, if we remember the time that he informally offered me the hitting coach job when I asked him about future Wildcats Cam Walty shutting him out one day when he was with Nevada. He was struggling with how it's going, but I think he's figured all that out, and this is the fourth year, and that also stands to reason he's got 1 year left on his contract after this year. Some decisions have to be made by the school. Do you want to extend Chip, or you don't send coaches into the final year of a contract? That just doesn't happen. It's not something you want to do if you expect sustained success. So I see no reason why they would not want to extend Chip. So I wouldn't be surprised to hear something coming from that this year.
He's a relative bargain too, compared to what a lot of other coaches are paid in college baseball at top 25 programs. I think
Mhm.
his initial contract was $500,000 a
And it goes up
year, and maybe
10,000 a year. Yep.
yeah. So by the end, he's making 550. I mean, we would all love to make, you and I would love to make that much money. But compared to the going rate for college baseball coaches, I don't think it's that much, and I don't think he's going to demand all that much either, because, like you said, he loves Arizona.
Mm-hmm.
He loves the University of Arizona. He wants to be here. Dave Hickey, the former athletic director who hired Chip, got a lot of criticism because people thought he's just hiring someone who's not going to want to leave. Like, after getting burned by Jay Johnson, who's really like the first baseball coach to ever leave Arizona for another job of his own volition.
He was the first coach in any major sport at Arizona to
Yeah.
leave for another job since the 80s, since Larry Smith went football, from Arizona to USC. I mean, it's happened a couple times since then. It also happened in soccer, and then it just happened in football with Jed Fish going to Washington, but it hadn't really happened before, but it was such a, I don't know if it was a surprise that Jay Johnson left, but more just how quickly it happened, and that it was at a program that was at one of its highest points. And then suddenly, now what do we do? And considering that this happened after the World Series was over, or during the College World Series at the end of June, the concept of maybe trying to poach somebody from another program was going to be a little bit harder to do. So maybe if they knew in April or May that they were going to need to make a change, Chip might not have been as high on the list, and they would have put out some feelers for Mark Wasikowski at Oregon, or Dave Checketts at UC Santa Barbara, or UC Irvine, those kind of guys, to see if they were interested. Chip was going to be one of the first calls because of the circumstances, and it looked concerning to many, but I think anybody who was worried about it at that point shouldn't be worried about it now. If they are, then there's a bias that they just don't want that to be successful.
Yeah, I think that the wanting to be here factor is meaningful. Now, you don't want to just hire someone for that reason and that reason alone.
No, you don't want complacency.
Right. But you're not going to get complacency out of Chip Hale. Like, he gets up early in the morning and lifts weights with the players. Like you said, he is a very competitive guy. This means a lot to him, for this program to be successful. Now, the last hurdle for him is to get past the regional round at a minimum, right? I think people, like you said, kind of every 4 years, Arizona's, been gone to Omaha, been in the College World Series. There's just because it's 4 years later, there's no guarantee that will happen. But I think for this season to be deemed a success, at a minimum, they have to win a regional. You are not necessarily expected to win a regional if you're not hosting, but I think if things go the way that we think they might for this team, they could be in that position again. Obviously, it's advantageous for that to happen. It was bitterly disappointing last year to work so hard to get into that position and then not come through. I think Grand Canyon was kind of a uniquely difficult matchup for them because they had so much familiarity with Arizona. They'd beaten Arizona during the season. They played at High Corbett. Like, nothing was unfamiliar for them, and I think they were a tougher matchup than a lot of other, 4 seeds within a regional would have been. But he's got to break through, I think, this year to really win over the fans once and for all, and then also, convince Desiree Reed-Francois, the current athletic director, that he's the right man for the job.
Yeah, it's unfair to put it in some ways, to put it on just a couple games at the end, but it's a results-based business, and it's the same in other sports. I mean, Tommy Lloyd has done tremendous in basketball, but people, if they were to top out at the Sweet 16 or earlier again this year, is there a ceiling? And if there's an expectation to go beyond that, and there is at Arizona, I mean, they've made a bunch of World Series and they've won 4 titles. So just making the tournament is not good enough. And there needs to be something beyond that. I mean, there is still a lot of luck and just randomness to college baseball because you're only as good as your starting pitcher. And as great as those pitchers were all year long, they just happen to have some of their worst performances of the season in that one game. And it's a double elimination situation, but if they're back to back, well, 2 in barbecue and hey, great season. I mean, it doesn't take away from the fact that they won the regular season title despite being picked 9th and then won the conference tournament to have that double situation in the final year of the Pac-12. I mean, that's what made them be a host when a month earlier they didn't even look like they were a team that could make the NCAA tournament. So, I mean, they had what you wanted from a team to be able to make the tournament. They lost, and every year there's a host that goes 0-2, and it was Arizona this past year.
Arizona opens the season on Friday, February 14th in the Shriners Children's College Showdown. They face Ole Miss, a very familiar opponent from a lot of recent postseason matchups. That game is at 2:00 Arizona time. You can watch it on Flow College. This is a subscription streaming service. You would have to pay for it unless you got some sort of a hookup. I think it's $20 for 1 month. So if you want to see Arizona this weekend, it will cost you $20. They play number 15 Clemson on Saturday at 10 a.m. And then they play Louisville on Sunday. The home opener is Tuesday, February 18th. It is an afternoon game against New Mexico. I think it's kind of cool that their home opener is a Tuesday afternoon. Then, as you mentioned, Brian, they're hosting San Diego, which was a tournament team last year for a 3-game series over the weekend. And then they go back to Texas at the end of February. They're at Rice for a midweek game. And then they're in the Astros Foundation College Classic at the ball field formerly known as Minute Maid Park. It's now called Dakin Park. And they only face number 1 Texas A&M, number 18 Mississippi State, and number 4 Tennessee in that tournament. So we will find out what this Arizona Wildcat baseball team is made of. Before we get out of here, Brian, tell the people out there where they can find your work.
Okay, so I am the site manager of Arizona Desert Swarm, AZ Desert Swarm, if you will, and it is arizonadesertswarm.com or azdesertswarm.com. You can also find us on Twitter at azdesertswarm, and our site covers everything U of A related. We have some stuff up right now related to baseball, related to football, last night's men's basketball game, softball, women's basketball, volleyball. We cover it all, just like the Star does. We do not have a print version. So Michael and I are colleagues, but also competitors in some ways. I'm winning in the hair battle, but Michael wins in most other things.
And Brian and I, we ended up spending a lot of time together in the press box at High Corbett Field, and that will once again be the case this season. It's a really one of the things I enjoy the most about this job is just covering baseball at High C. It's just sort of, I don't know, it's just more chill than football or basketball. There's less attention on it, which is kind of a good thing. And I don't know, there's just kind of, sometimes I feel like there's no place I'd rather be. It's kind of my happy place in Tucson.
Well, I think when you're covering a baseball game, it's like you are watching a baseball game. You just happen to be working. Whereas when you're covering a basketball game or football or other sports, so much of your time is on the work that you are worried that you're going to miss something looking at the game because you're writing something down or typing or whatever. Baseball has that built-in kind of pause so that between each pitch, so that you can just soak it all in. And it's a great environment. I mean, we're going to probably be predicting some home runs before they happen. Look forward to the first time that Michael brings up Deuces Wild, which for anybody who doesn't know is when the count is 2 balls and 2 strikes. There are 2 outs and there's 2 men on base. The added function of maybe having a number 2 or a number 22 pitching or hitting or if the score is 2-2, or if it's the second inning, we can have a lot of those situations, but it happens pretty much every game. That's one of those things you can always expect to happen at the ballpark. But that's another thing about baseball is we always see something new every day at the ballpark. We saw it pretty much every game last year, and we'll probably see some ridiculous, I've never seen that before situations. And I think that, among other things, is what makes baseball so fun to watch and to cover.
Yeah, they had 8 walk-off victories last year, which is probably something that hasn't happened too often in the storied history of Arizona baseball.
No.
We thank Brian for joining us today here on the Wildcast podcast. I think we're going to have Bruce Pascoe on next week to talk about men's basketball, catch up with him. They've got Houston on Saturday, and I think they go to Baylor on Monday, so no let up for the men's basketball team. Very difficult schedule that they've got going. Remember, our Wildcaster app has changed. You can now, if you want, now you can't do this, Brian, because you are not an Apple person. But if you have an iPhone, you can actually get the upgraded version of the Wildcaster, and you can subscribe exclusively to the Wildcaster. You don't have to get a subscription to the Arizona Daily Star if you don't want. You can get all of our sports content, everything, not only Arizona stuff, but high schools, junior college, etc. All my columns are on there, and that's $4.99 a month. If you want to do that, that is a new structure that we have to our app, and I think it's a really nice option for people who just care about sports, which is all we try to care about in this world. Sometimes it's hard to block out all of the other things that are going on, but that's our focus here, and our focus will be largely on Arizona baseball this spring with huge expectations for the team. You will find all of our coverage at Tucson.com. And as Brian mentioned, they cover all the sports, including baseball, pretty intensively over at AZ Desert Swarm as well. And we will see each other in the press box very soon. Thanks again to Brian. Thanks to everybody for listening to the Wildcast podcast. We will see you next time.